by the UKIP Assembly member and economic spokesperson Mark Reckless. Mark Reckless, you've just heard there Nigel Farage calling for Douglas Carswell to be sacked as the party's MP. What's your reaction?
Well, we've got to support our new leader, Paul Nuttall. I think ex-leaders will always have a voice through the media. We heard from John Major yesterday, and I don't think any honour could truly reflect the enormity of Nigel's achievement. But our new leader can't possibly give way to ultimatums that so-and-so should be chairman or these people should be thrown out of the party. He has to lead the party in his own way, and I want to get behind him.
Right, but the UKIP party chairman, Paul Oakden, is said to be meeting with Douglas Carswell this afternoon to discuss the situation. So what do you think that means?
Well, I hope it's a productive meeting. Of course, our only MP should meet with our party chairman. But
is it as the result of Nigel Farage calling for him to go?
Well, I have no idea about what the meeting will be about, but I don't think there's anything exceptional about our chairman meeting our MP. And I think, we should calm this down. We shouldn't have personal attacks. I don't think it's fair for you to say our performance in Stoke was disastrous. We got a quarter of the vote. Before Douglas and I had our by-elections, it would have been inconceivable for UKIP to get a quarter of the vote. And we really saw at that time, we were up to close to a quarter of a vote in national opinion polls at the time of the Rochester and Stroud by-election. And I really hope we would widen our appeal, be a radical populist force. Yes, talking about immigration, a very important issue, but also widening our appeal to talk about the NHS. And one of the things I'm doing with Paul at the moment, our economy spokesman, is trying to cut VAT on some of the key essentials,
right,
fuel at home and takeaway food.
Perhaps what's preventing you actually talking about the things you've just outlined is what is going on between Nigel Farage and Douglas Carswell. I mean, is your former leader conducting himself in a way that you deem acceptable and appropriate?
Well, I mean, it's for Nigel to judge what he wants to say, and he will always have a voice in the media. But I think UKIP is about more than whether one person, even an ex-leader such as Nigel, should have a knighthood. I mean, I know Douglas has pushed very, very hard that UKIP should have its fair share of peerages. It's disgraceful that we have two chambers and one of those.
So why is Nigel Farage accusing him?
Strength.
Why is Nigel Farage accusing Douglas Carswell of not actually doing enough to secure that knighthood, and, as I say, asking for him to go?
Well, I think Douglas's focus, and I know he met the Chief Whip and others, and I think he's campaigned on this for over a long time, both publicly and in private, is that UKIP should be given fair representation in our legislature. It is outrageous, given the vote we got, that we don't have peers in the House of Lords. But what we need to do is to focus on our core message, not just controlling and indeed reducing immigration, but improving the NHS and really pushing forward on the economy.
But when we spoke to Nigel Farage just now, he is convinced that Douglas Carswell is bent on a campaign of undermining him and dividing the party. Why?
Well, but Nigel is an ex-leader. We've had a referendum. We've won that referendum. I mean, Nigel paid tribute to Douglas in his article, saying that Douglas had really single-handedly got vote leave the nomination for
So why is he calling for him to go and leave the party?
And we've won that referendum. We're leaving the European Union. Hopefully within a few weeks we should trigger Article 50. That's absolutely fantastic news. But what Paul Nuttall will do now as our leader is stake out that domestic agenda. Yes, make sure Brexit happens properly, but also what are we going to do to improve the NHS?
Right,
what are we doing on the economy?
Paul Nuttall just
Cutting
ignore
VAT.
Nigel Farage? You've said he's the ex-leader and that he will always have a voice in the media. In other words, you don't think he should be speaking on behalf of the party. Should Paul Nuttall just ignore Nigel Farage?
Well, I think the gauntlet has been laid down, and I think at some point Paul will speak to the party. He will do interviews, and he needs to decide his priorities and where he wants to lead us. But I can't see how he can possibly give way to an ultimatum that he should purge a certain list of people or put a particular person as chairman or else. You can't run a party in that way. And I know Paul Nuttall respects our activists, respects our members, leads a democratic party, and I believe he is a strong leader who will focus on the key issues such as the NHS, such as the economy, as well as immigration, and as well as making sure that Brexit really does mean a proper Brexit, where we once again govern ourselves.
Mark Reckless, thank you very much. I'm joined now by Michael Heaver, Nigel Farage's former press secretary. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Why should Carswell go?
Well, look, when Douglas Carswell first joined UKIP, I think there was massive excitement in the party, and that quickly disappeared as we saw what unfolded. I mean, I'll give you one example. December the 18th, 2015, David Cameron had been at the EU summit. We wanted to get on the front foot as the Brexit campaign. Instead, Douglas Carswell that day chose to say that UKIP needed to have a new leader. I'm afraid what we've seen is a concerted, sustained effort to infiltrate and neutralise UKIP from within. That's in Owen Bennett's Brexit Club book. It involved Douglas Carswell, Daniel Hannan and Mark Reckless. And I mean, forget UK IP, it was more KGB. We've had people come into the party and deliberately try and take Nigel Farage and UKIP out of the referendum campaign because they deem them to be toxic. Now, we know that's not true. We know that Nigel Farage, in the end, took part in the most watched referendum campaign debate against the Prime Minister. We know that it was the immigration issue that won the day. But these people viewed Nigel Farage and UKIP as something that had to be dealt with, and I'm afraid it was an incredibly...
So you think there is a conspiracy akin to the KGB that has been led by Douglas Carswell,
well, this is on record,
who is UKIP's only MP?
Which is why it's so upsetting for people in UKIP. I mean, this is, as I said, it's in Owen Bennett's Brexit Club.
Or are you really becoming a conspiracy theorist?
No, this is not conspiracy, this is fact. There are people, I'm afraid, in the Tory party and on the Leave side who saw Nigel Farage as a threat. They saw him as someone that needed to be shut up, and they saw the immigration issue as something that had to be avoided. Now, as I said,
they haven't achieved shutting him up, of course, because he's still talking.
And they never will.
But, I mean, the evidence, you say, is absolutely clear. Isn't this, though, just a spat between two grown men who hold different views within the same party? End of.
No, I think this is about the future of UKIP, actually, and I think, obviously, Paul Nuttall's come in. We had the Stoke by-election. The party, it was disappointing performance. There's no denying that.
Whose fault was that?
Well, I think that there's a couple of... I mean, I think the party on the whole was on the back foot a bit too much. I think it played a bit too much defence. I think what it needs to do, as Nigel and Aaron Banks have said, is get on the front foot, start pushing policy, come up with new ideas, you know, English Parliament, abolishing the House of Lords, proportional representation. It needs to get on the front foot now, and as well as owning the immigration issue, of course.
Right. I mean, is it still just about immigration? Because we've heard successive UKIP politicians say that the party is broader than just immigration. But if you listen to Nigel Farage, that doesn't seem to be the case, because he disagrees with Douglas Carswell's views on immigration.
No, I think what Nigel's saying is that immigration as an issue is still very, very high up the agenda, and we've seen the Tory party already rowing back, saying, well, post-Brexit we may have to continue mass EU migration. If that happens, there'll be a huge surge in the polls for UKIP. But, yes, the party does have to establish itself on a wider range of issues. And I think overall as a party it has to stay radical, and it has to get on the front foot. Stop playing defence, get on the offence.
Do you think Nigel Farage, though himself, he's the ex-leader, is just undermining Paul Nuttall's leadership and the party by this escalation of war of words?
No, I think Nigel Farage has devoted most of his adult life to building up UKIP. I think it's something he loves, he cares deeply and passionately about.
Is he contributing to it now, looking, as some people would say, as if it's imploding?
Well, no, Nigel Farage is saying and pointing out the things that he thinks are wrong with the party. And if he didn't do that, that would be negligence. The fact that he's built this party and he loves it, of course he's going to want to input. Of course he's going to want to see it progress in an effective way.
Let's have briefly look at the email exchange. This is the exchange between Douglas Carswell and Lord Pearson, who is a UKIP peer, and this is about making a plea for a knighthood for Nigel Farage. But the email shows clearly that Douglas Carswell did actually make a plea to Gavin Williamson at the time in the government. And then he makes a joke, admittedly, afterwards. Is Nigel Farage just being thin-skinned?
No, I don't think so. Look, Lord Pearson, who's as honest as the day is long, no one's got a bad word to say about the guy. He even says to the Telegraph in the story today that he feels Douglas Carswell didn't give his backing to this. And I just think it's a real shame. I think the potential for Douglas to have been a possible, positive contribution to the party was there. I'm afraid it's been squandered, and it was squandered because, as I say, this was about personality. People want to stop Nigel Farage and weaken UKIP's voice in the referendum. It thankfully failed, but I'm afraid we're still seeing the fallout from that.
I mean, UKIP have achieved, of course, their goal of the referendum, and they got the result that they wanted. What do you think the future holds for the party now?
I think they're now a party without a purpose, and that's why you can see they are degenerating into this sort of trivial playground infighting. There isn't a role for UKIP any longer.
Well, the Conservative Party have been saying for 10, 20 years there's no role for UKIP. They've always said that. I've also heard at every single by-election and European election and general election that UKIP's job is over and it's never going to progress from where it is now. So thankfully, I don't think the establishment's record on calling the prospects of the future of UKIP are very strong. But I do think for UKIP to have a future, and it is at a crossroads, it must be radical. It must talk about things like an English Parliament, proportional representation, and getting rid of the House of Lords, as well as owning that important immigration issue.
You're desperately trying to come up with policies that out of thin air.
Well,
because the only thing you were
UKIP had a full manifesto at the last general election.
The only thing you were interested in has been achieved.
We're going to end it there. Thank you very much, Michael Heaver.